This woman was supposed to be the destined crown princess, but now, she can only watch helplessly as the crown prince marries someone else. The woman is named Medea, the legitimate eldest daughter of Duke Belial's family, and also the former fiancé of the crown prince. On this day, the entire empire was celebrating. Together they rejoiced over the marriage of the crown prince and Psyche. Yet among the crowd, some people whispered that Psyche had originally lost in the contest to become crown princess. But in order to marry Psyche, the crown prince personally plotted and framed the family of the former crown princess to be. The more they talked, the more excited they became, and they even dared to make jokes about the duke's daughter. They said that ill-tempered Medea would never be able to get married. Medea was ruthless, although she did not deal with that commoner in public at the time. By the next day, people found a corpse in the river with its tongue cut out. A corpse with its tongue cut out. Standing atop a tall building, Medea listened to this news expressionlessly. And Psyche, who was on her honeymoon, had not forgotten about Medea either. She seemed eager to repair her relationship with her former romantic rival. So she specially chose a ring for her, one that was big and dazzling. And the crown prince, who was waiting to enjoy the show, naturally approved very much. Psyche sent this gift, full of mockery, to Medea. Medea was sitting at home listening to the gramophone when Psyche's subordinate came to deliver the gift. He also said that the crown princess hoped to personally see the duke's daughter open it. Medea, who had always been composed and proper, calmly said that this was not an excessive request. After seeing the gift, she even commented how thoughtful. But as soon as the subordinate left, Medea directly smashed the lamp to vent her anger. That Psyche, who was best at disgusting people, had specifically sent a diamond ring. It was obvious that she wanted to humiliate her with the meaning the ring represented. Medea decided to settle old and new scores all at once. Medea gave Psyche a bouquet of calming flowers. She also invited her to afternoon tea. As if they were very familiar with each other, Medea said that putting a sugar cube in the tea would make the aroma richer. Psyche said that Medea seemed to know a lot about tea. And the maids nearby, who were gossiping about whether Medea was going to poison the crown princess, had clearly already annoyed the duke's daughter with their chatter. She softly remarked that the crown princess truly was close to the people. But then she asked Psyche if she knew what it meant for disaster to come from careless words. Medea would not mind letting those maids personally taste the punishment of one jong red. Seeing that their mistress had been wronged, the knight specially assigned to protect Psyche immediately came over to drive Medea away. Wholeheartedly loyal to his lady, he was terrified that something might happen to Psyche. Medea tactfully turned and left. Not long afterward, Psyche indeed fainted in her bedroom, sprawled on her back. This terrified the knight, and he immediately rode off at full speed to report the news. The knight had already inspected the suspicious flowers and the tea set Medea brought. Yet he could never have imagined that once the fragrance of the flowers mixed with the poison in the sugar cube, it would cause dizziness. And even less could he have imagined that Medea would ambush him halfway. And with one stab, she pierced his heart directly. Medea said that she wanted Psyche to taste the pain of losing a loved one as well. After waking from her dizziness, Psyche barely managed to eat a little breakfast. Then she hurried to the temple to pray. As for the knight's murder yesterday, the servants did not dare report it at all. And the subordinate, who went to look for the missing knight, was also personally killed by Medea's friend, Marquis Helio. No one had ever seen anything so bizarre. These romantic rivals, who looked as if they were staging palace intrigue every time they met, actually swapped souls in the temple pool between the calculating duke's daughter and the naive, sweet crown princess, who would be the one to laugh last. On this day, Psyche endured her physical discomfort and put on the holy object symbolizing peace and safety amid everyone's blessings. Then she devoutly knelt before the statue and prayed. On the day of prayer, in order to prevent Psyche from meeting with any accident, the crown prince had the entire temple cleared out on purpose. But this also happened to give Medea an opportunity. Yet Psyche showed not the slightest surprise at Medea's appearance. She even bluntly asked, "What happened to my knight?" Medea, who was always in control, was also stunned at that moment. And the gentle Psyche suddenly threw herself at Medea. She loudly demanded to know whether Medea hated her, but said that what she loved was the crown prince himself. And what Medea loved was merely the status of crown princess. These words only made Medea want to laugh. "Do you really think I'm the kind of person who plays boring emotional games? Giving up the position of ruler of the empire?" Medea told Psyche not to get her snot, and tears all over her. She said there was nothing worth saying to a woman like Psyche, all curves and no brains. Just as the two were locked in argument, Medea accidentally fell into the temple pool. Psyche immediately jumped in to save her. When Medea was on the verge of drowning, she sincerely prayed to the god of Esperanto for a chance to become crown princess. Medea wanted to take everything from Psyche. When she woke up, Medea found herself surrounded by weeping servants, all calling her Miss Psyche. She immediately got up and rushed to the mirror. She found that she had indeed changed from purple hair and black eyes to blonde hair and blue eyes. Could this really just be a dream? The crown prince pushed open the door and entered. He directly came close and pressed himself against Medea. At the mere thought of this, I feel incomparable fear. The crown prince embraced Medea and swore on the spot that he would kill the duke's daughter, who had dragged the crown princess into the water. Hearing this, Medea almost laughed out loud. It seemed she had truly taken everything from Psyche. But the person the crown prince wanted to kill was precisely herself. The proposal from this body's original owner was indeed not bad, but given Psyche's personality, she would never agree with such cruel words. So Medea instead pleaded on behalf of the current Psyche. Meanwhile, Psyche also woke up, only to discover that her face had already become Medea's. She wanted to go home, but a group of servants stopped her. They kept calling Psyche Duke's daughter. In the end, Psyche escaped from the Duke's mansion and returned to her original home. Yet she saw the crown prince viciously clutching her throat and coldly warning her. Medea watched all this coldly from the side. It was only a change of body, yet the crown prince could no longer recognize the Psyche he supposedly loved so deeply. Their so-called love was utterly ridiculous. In the end, the crown prince ordered that the duke's daughter was not to come within half a step of the crown princess again. Psyche, who was now under strict surveillance, could only helplessly hug her own arms. The duke's daughter had far too many enemies. If she exposed her true identity, Psyche would certainly die. So Psyche could only brace herself and diligently play the role of the duke's daughter. Marquis Helio sensed that something major seemed to have happened recently, because not one of the letters he sent to Medea had been opened. Because of her identity as crown princess, Medea could not move about freely. So she first lured the crown prince away, bought a messenger bird at the market, and then returned home. When Medea arrived at the study, she very clearly sensed that something was off with the crown prince. He actually began mocking Psyche for not even being able to understand the empire's history. He even said that they might as well give the crown princess a fairy tale book to relieve her boredom. What showed in his eyes was clearly disdain for Psyche's body. Just a moment ago, Aruz had still been surprised that his silly, sweet crown princess had actually started reading books on imperial history. But at this moment, inside the crown princess's body was already the sharp and capable Medea. In order not to expose her identity, Medea deliberately said that gaps had appeared in her memory. That was why she wanted to search for clues through reading, and the crown prince immediately played along. He pretended affectionately to embrace Medea, but in truth, Medea had already seen through the fact that both of them were harboring their own schemes. Psyche's life at the Duke's house was relatively easy for the moment, because the Duke himself was not often at the residence, and the Duchess was currently battling illness. So her identity would not be exposed for the time being, and logically nothing should go wrong, except for that person's arrival. Helio was the young head of the Marquis family. When he was 12, his parents died in a carriage accident. As a child, he was therefore bullied for a long time by greedy people. When he was almost unable to endure it any longer, Helio met Medea. Under her guidance, Helio quickly reclaimed the position of family head, and at 18, he won glorious military achievements for the empire. Helio and Medea had known each other for a full 7 years, but Psyche was not sure whether she could fool this person. Sure enough, Helio had barely greeted Psyche when he immediately sensed that something was wrong. The clever Helio proposed a swordsmanship match with Psyche. But how could someone like naive, sweet Psyche possibly know how to use a dangerous weapon like a sword? Yet because Medea's body itself was strong enough, Psyche unexpectedly lifted the sword with ease. But the way she held the sword immediately caught Helio's attention, because Helio's swordsmanship had originally been taught personally by Medea. And the way Psyche was holding the sword at this moment was obviously terribly wrong. He was truly curious about who exactly was occupying Medea's body. Under Helio's relentless pressure, Psyche could only imitate Medea's usual manner and loudly scold Helio for his audacity. She raised the sword to Helio's neck and warned him that if he came one step closer, she would kill him. But Helio still saw through it. Psyche was obviously acting. Maybe she could fool others, but she could never fool him, her childhood companion. Helio tested her by grasping the blade with his hand, letting the sharp edge cut his neck. This directly frightened the timid and fragile Psyche so much that she immediately dropped the sword in her hand. Psyche said that was enough. The servants immediately broke into discussion, because this was the first time they had seen blood drawn in such a match. In the end, Helio applied medicine to the wound. He expressed his apology to Psyche, but then immediately asked her whether she would be going to the palace banquet a week later and whether he could accompany her. Psyche looked at Helio, who was holding back tears. Softening, she said, "Of course, Helio." But Psyche did not know that the real Duke's daughter, Medea, normally only called the man opposite her Helio. However, Helio did not continue to expose the matter. Psyche was still secretly pleased with herself, thinking that she had actually succeeded in playing Miss Medea. This woman exchanged souls with the crown princess. In one leap, she went from a fallen duke's daughter to the person beside the crown prince's pillow. Unfortunately, the extremely controlling crown prince loved to monitor the crown princess's every move, and Medea had to get in contact with her subordinate Helio. So she first wrote a fake letter to draw the attention of the crown prince's men. Then she secretly passed the real letter to her subordinate, so that Helio would know the truth that she and Psyche had swapped souls. Medea used transparent lemon juice as ink and wrote the words on the paper. When the time came, All it would take was lightly heating it over fire for the writing to appear. The black pigeon flapped away carrying the letter, but it was shot dead on the spot by the crown prince's men. After the subordinate reported the contents of the letter, a meaningful, sinister smile appeared on the crown prince's face. As soon as dawn broke, he prepared to go find the silly little sweetheart he had carefully chosen and continue playing mind games. As for the real letter, Medea had long since tied it to a cat's tail and sent it to Helios' home. Early in the morning, Medea was called up to be dressed and made up, all because His Highness the Crown Prince could not wait to see her. The Crown Prince walked into the bedroom and asked whether Psyche had something she wanted to say to him. Imitating Psyche's sweet and innocent manner, Medea said that now that she had seen him, he had no idea how happy she was. The Crown Prince smiled and said, "Then you really must be hopelessly in love with me. But can you explain what you meant by saying, 'I'm at Psyche's house right now, don't let Medea see me'?" Medea shyly covered her face. She had long since discovered that someone was monitoring her 24 hours a day. Only when the Crown Prince was present would those people temporarily disappear. Precisely because of this, Medea had to make every preparation. Medea explained it this way. Recently, she had received a letter from Lord Helio, whose purpose was to hope that she and the Duke's daughter could reconcile. Medea had already refused that request and had originally been planning to tell the Crown Prince. She had not expected that the Crown Prince already knew about it. Instead, it made her seem like a fool for having worried for nothing. The Crown Prince reached out and pulled Medea into his arms. He even lowered his head and kissed her forehead, saying that he was simply too worried about the Crown Princess. As he spoke, the Crown Prince ordered the servants to bring over a bracelet for Medea to try on. He also inexplicably said that even bruises could be covered with it. Before Medea could even react, a pair of bracelets had already been put on her hands. The Crown Prince finally revealed those so-called cautious methods of control. He told Medea that perhaps the Duke's daughter simply wanted to kill her. "I'll let you out of the basement before the banquet begins, and everything I'm doing is because I love you." But Medea was not a love-brained fool like Psyche. She only found the Crown Prince's whole way of doing things absurd to the extreme. To speak of domestic violence and imprisonment in such a grand and righteous way. It seemed that this sole exchange between Medea and Psyche had instead made Medea suffer in place of that silly sweetheart. Psyche's nanny even questioned Medea through tears, asking how she could disappoint His Highness. It seemed there were hardly any normal people around Psyche either. Although on the surface the Crown Prince was doing this to guard against the cunning Duke's daughter, in reality, he would rather lock up his own crown princess than spend even a little more effort protecting her. Late at night, Psyche lay on the bed in the Duke's mansion and suddenly noticed the wind rising outside the window. To her surprise, Helio brazenly climbed in through the window. Helio had once made an agreement with Medea. As long as he knocked twice on the right window closest to the bed, it meant that Helio had come to climb in through the window to see Medea. But the purple-haired girl before him showed no reaction at all to this signal. Because of this, Helio became even more convinced that the letter Medea sent him was real. Looking at the purple-haired girl before him, he said, "Let's get acquainted again, Miss Psyche." Psyche was so nervous that even her heartbeat became erratic. Helio, however, said that her reactions were far too slow. Then Helio stated that he had come under Medea's orders specifically to teach Psyche how to play the real Medea. And now, there were only 5 days left before Psyche had to go to the palace banquet. The current Psyche not only could not flirt and talk about love with the crown prince she loved, she also had to cram desperately every night. Helio, the little supervisor sent by Medea, sat beside her watching her closely, not allowing poor student Psyche to doze off. Even more excessive was that Helio even said that all the books in front of her were material that Medea had already finished learning at the age of 8. Psyche pulled a long face and complained that it was far too difficult. Helio was truly worried whether the woman before him could really impersonate Medea. After all, whether in breeding and common knowledge, or in dealing with people and handling affairs, the gap between her and Medea was simply far too great. But things had reached this point, so they could only take a gamble. What Medea had not expected was that the crown prince, who outwardly seemed to dote on his wife to the bone, could actually lock his fiancée in the basement for several days without a word of concern. And in this basement, which looked like a dungeon, there seemed to be traces showing that someone else had lived there for a long time. Medea guessed that the sickly and frail Psyche had never appeared publicly before the age of 16. Perhaps she had always only been able to survive in a basement like this. She had not expected that even her marriage would be all show and no substance. On the day of the birthday banquet, the crown prince finally let Medea out and personally dressed her magnificently for the banquet. The subjects downstairs all offered their blessings to the crown prince. Standing upstairs, Medea looked from afar at Psyche downstairs. Psyche's emotions were in turmoil because last year she and the crown prince had agreed that this year she would definitely celebrate his birthday properly. But now, she could only, in the identity of the Duke's daughter, Watch the Crown Prince and Medea interact sweetly, and the people beside her were even sarcastically saying that the Crown Prince and Crown Princess truly looked like a match made in heaven. Seeing that no one had noticed that the person inside that body was no longer her, Psyche nearly broke down on the spot, and even wanted to rush up and prove her identity. But Helio stopped Psyche's impulse in time, because those words had originally been said deliberately for Psyche to hear. Such behavior was nothing more than provoking the Duke's daughter, whose family had fallen from grace. In the distance, Medea danced gracefully with the Crown Prince, while the Crown Prince was somewhat puzzled as to why the Crown Princess had not stepped on his foot today. Medea asked in return whether it was because he had improved a lot. Looking at the unusually obedient Crown Princess, the Crown Prince said with a smile that she had truly given him plenty of face today. As the banquet neared its end, Medea finally found a chance to meet up with Helio, and because Psyche could not find Helio anywhere, she could only wander around by herself. Unexpectedly, she was soon targeted by an imposing noble lady. Though Psyche was innocent, she also knew that the woman before her had come with bad intentions. For example, at this very moment, the other woman had already begun speaking in a mocking, sarcastic tone. "I heard that after losing the position of Crown Princess, the Duke's daughter has gone mad." Looking at this stupid and vicious woman, Psyche recalled when she had not yet become Crown Princess. She too had once been bullied by her in this way. At that time, after this noble lady failed to curry favor with the Duke's daughter, she turned around and bullied the weak and fragile Psyche instead, even splashing a cup of cold tea directly over her head. And now, Psyche, who possessed the Duke's daughter's powerful body, finally decided to fight back against this bully with absolutely no bottom line. It turned out that fairy tales had always been lies. Princes and princesses would not necessarily live happily ever after. Just like now, after the Crown Prince's birthday banquet ended, he immediately sent people to assassinate the Crown Princess. What secrets were hidden behind all this? Even Medea could not understand it for a time. After she and Psyche swapped souls, the longer Medea interacted with that Yandra-like Crown Prince, the more certain she became that the Crown Prince not only despised this silly, sweet Psyche from the bottom of his heart, but also imprisoned her from time to time. So the clever Medea guessed that the Crown Prince must have made some sort of deal with Psyche's family. And Helio directly climbed from a tree onto the balcony to see Medea. Medea teased, "Long time no see, Helio. You seem thinner too." Helio was almost instantly overjoyed. The woman he loved was actually concerned about him. Helio could no longer hold back and directly told Medea how he felt. "You have no idea how worried I've been about you." Meanwhile, Psyche, having been unreasonably provoked by the noble lady, wore Medea's chilling face and said to the bully with a smile that was not really a smile, "You're not exactly wrong to say I'm crazy. Otherwise, how could I tolerate your insolence?" Only then did the noble lady realize just how childish, laughable, and disgraceful her bullying methods were. The other ladies nearby also hurried to smooth things over and began criticizing her for not knowing her limits. Seeing that she had finally managed to fight back successfully, Psyche could not help but feel happy, because in the past, it was only the old self who always let others push her around, who had been bullied again and again. Now Psyche wanted to continue living on in the identity of the Duke's daughter, but love-brained Psyche was still struggling inside. She still could not let go of her feelings for the Yandra-like Crown Prince. She even still wanted to keep protecting him. What Psyche did not know was that if she had still remained in her original body, she would probably already have become a corpse secretly murdered by that Yandra-like Crown Prince. At this moment, with one order from the Crown Prince, dozens of royal shadow guards moved out at the same time. They had only one target: assassinate the Crown Princess. Helio and Medea were still talking when a subordinate came to ask Medea to go see the Crown Prince. Go to the little supermarket in the forest to collect free eggs. Helio had no choice but to hide quickly, but there was not enough time, and Helio still had no chance to say that even if Medea had exchanged souls with someone else, the one he wanted to protect was still Medea herself. Medea followed the servant to the so-called little forest supermarket, only then discovering that the free eggs were a lie. The real purpose was to completely ruin her. Medea had not expected that all she wanted was to get some free eggs, yet the price would be so great. She would actually have to get her throat slit by the shadow guards first, then go be reincarnated in the underworld. Medea flew into a rage on the spot, stabbed one man to death with a single thrust, and took down all those shadow guards with their false advertising. Moreover, she immediately guessed that all these shadow guards had been sent by the Yandra-like Crown Prince. It seemed that Medea truly was a beautiful young woman blessed with intelligence, beauty, and martial strength. Helio, Medea's little follower, was swearing just a second ago that he would protect Medea. The very next second, he ran off to wipe the tears of the delicate Psyche. Psyche said that Medea was truly amazing. Even when impersonating the Crown Princess, not a single person doubted her. But when she looked at herself in comparison, just a few words from others were already too much for her to bear, and she could only run out in sadness. Psyche was very worried that she would ruin everything Medea had painstakingly built. And the warm-hearted Helio comforted Psyche, saying that as long as he was here, he would not let her destroy everything Medea had done. Moreover, Lady Medea was far stronger than she imagined, and she would not be crushed by such a trivial matter. The woman before them was unbelievably terrifying in strength. Even though her whole body felt weak and limp, and her limbs had no strength, she still beat the assassins who came to hunt her into complete defeat. Who sent you here? Only then did Assassin A realize that their foolish group had underestimated this woman. Medea's strength was simply terrifying beyond measure. Assassin A immediately signaled that they had to treat the crown princess like a knight, not a fragile count's daughter. Although Medea was still handling these assassins with ease, her slender arms still looked somewhat strained when blocking their attacks. As for that deranged crown prince, after not seeing his fiancée for a long time, he was smiling especially brightly at this moment. Even the envoys who had come to congratulate him on his birthday noticed it. The crown prince said, how could he not be happy on such a wonderful day? But the assassins he had sent out were utterly unable to feel happy, because the overwhelmingly powerful Medea made them impossible to guard against. They had clearly already confirmed which hand Medea usually used for her sword. Yet Medea fought skillfully with both hands, forcing them to retreat step by step. Medea glanced at the 6 despicable people before her. They wore no insignia of identity, and their mouths were as stubborn as ducks. She had no choice but to let these assassins sleep forever, to become unseen corpses hidden from the light. Medea dodged all of the assassins' attacks, 1 slash for each, straight through the heart. In the midst of the slaughter, Medea could not help but grow irritated. She did not know whether this soul swap arranged by God was meant to make her die in Psyche's place under the schemes of the deranged crown prince. But Medea knew very clearly in her heart that she had always been someone determined to fight against fate. When Medea was 8 years old, her parents always ignored her. Fortunately, there was a kind nanny in the house who used a cloth doll she had bought herself to comfort little Medea, saying it was a gift the Duchess had asked her to deliver. But Medea, who knew her parents' true nature well, naturally understood that this was a gift the nanny had paid for out of her own pocket. In order to gain her mother's attention, Medea often studied until she got nosebleeds. She treated, as long as studying won't kill me, I should study myself to death, as her life motto. This broke the nanny's heart, but sensible Medea would not let the nanny tell her parents. Unable to hold back, the nanny embraced little Medea, who was burning with fever. After all, she was so thin, so young, yet still studying so desperately, and that hug was also the only warmth Medea ever felt. From then on, Medea kept reading and practicing swordsmanship, until the spring 2 years later, she finally welcomed a turning point. The Duke mentioned that he was worried the continuous rainy weather that year would affect the grain reserves. The clever Medea immediately thought of a good solution. Why not cooperate with the neighboring territory? That place was located on the border and lacked soldiers to defend the city. Meanwhile, their own territory lacked grain, so why not exchange what each side needed? This way, the soldiers of their territory could be trained, and they could also accumulate combat experience for the knights. It was truly killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Such strategy naturally drew praise from the noble ladies. The Duke was also astonished by this idea. He immediately sent someone to contact the border count, allowing the territory to survive the 2nd year's famine smoothly. After offering advice and strategies to her Duke father, the Duke suddenly became a favorite before the Emperor, and even the border count regarded him with special favor. But it was also at this time that Medea realized something. Medea's strategies had allowed her father to rise to a higher level, and what she herself received were only those worthless dolls, dresses, and jewels. If things continued like this, wouldn't the one remembered in history become Medea's Duke father? To gain more power and influence, the Duke deliberately arranged an engagement between the crown prince and Medea. Medea looked at this father who treated her as a tool, yet she did not oppose the proposal. The kind nanny heard this astonishing news. She cried as she hugged Medea, telling her that she did not have to always let her father manipulate her. But Medea explained that the reason she agreed to become engaged to the crown prince was simply to place herself above the ducal household. He was always asking Medea questions about leading troops and waging war, then taking the answers as his own and reporting them to the emperor. But Medea had also kept her guard up. She had already begun preparing her own plan for revenge. At a tea party, Psyche, who appeared naive and sweet on the surface, happened to overhear the noble young ladies enthusiastically discussing Medea. With Lady Medea's support, our empire will definitely become stronger and more beautiful. Psyche, who was quite scheming, began following Medea from time to time. The hot-tempered Medea could not help complaining. Why did this woman always follow behind her without saying a word? Helio, hitting the nail on the head, said, "Of course, she follows you. Everyone knows that you are the one who is going to marry the crown prince, so they all want to make a good impression in front of Medea." One day, Medea passed by a street corner. There, she discovered 2 thugs speaking ill of Psyche, saying, for example, that Medea was as fierce as an evil ghost, and that Psyche was as delicate as an angel, yet Psyche seemed to have eyes on the back of her head. With righteous indignation, she said, "You don't even know Medea. So what gives you the right to speak badly of her behind her back? Seeing that Psyche refused to take the hint, one of the thugs raised his hand and slapped her hard across the face. Just as the thug was about to continue hitting her, Medea, the powerhouse, directly pinned him against the wall and did not stop until she had beaten him bloody. This frightened the two thugs so badly that they fled in panic. Kind-hearted Medea warned Psyche not to meddle in other people's business in the future, lest her fragile self get hurt by mistake. Psyche, showing off her acting skills, immediately shed sympathetic tears and said, "Have you already become used to people saying bad things about you? That truly breaks my heart." Later on, Medea was deceived by Psyche and mistakenly believed that she truly wanted to become close friends with her. Naturally, Medea did not refuse Psyche's invitations to get together. She taught Psyche how to play chess, and also taught Psyche some principles about how to conduct herself. Whenever Psyche was on the verge of tears, Medea would always comfort her patiently. Yet what Medea never expected was that in the end, Psyche would steal her fiancé in the name of true love. She even caused her family to fall into decline. Just like now, the crown prince wanted to break off his engagement with Medea and instead decide things through a selection competition. In the end, Medea, who had always been outstanding, still won the final position of crown princess. But Psyche, who had been eliminated during the crown princess selection, successfully became engaged to the crown prince and received the blessings of the entire nation. Who would have thought that Psyche was this kind of person? Back then, the deranged crown prince insisted on using a selection contest to choose the crown princess. Medea, who had never feared a challenge, naturally agreed with pleasure. Psyche, also a noble young lady, received an invitation to the selection sent by the crown prince as well. The hypocritical Psyche came to discuss the matter with Medea. She said she did not want this matter to affect their friendship. And besides, if it was about marriage, then as long as she could be with the person she loved, that would be enough. Kind-hearted Medea, however, thought this was a chance for Psyche to grow stronger, so she encouraged her to participate actively. First, I, Medea, will not be defeated easily. Second, the royal family will not make reckless decisions since they chose you. There must be a reason, so you must have confidence. The insincere Psyche, full of joy, said to Medea, "I will do my best." The selection for crown princess followed a best-of-3 format. As expected, Medea won the first 2 rounds by an overwhelming margin. Psyche said in a strange, sarcastic tone, "So when you said you wouldn't go easy on me, you really meant it." Medea looked helplessly at her good friend. The only person who could still smile so happily after losing was you. At the final round, His Majesty the Emperor read out the question. They were to explain how they would treat the Empire's people after becoming crown princess. The Emperor said that although the outcome had already been decided, he still hoped they would give their all until the end. Medea responded to His Majesty respectfully and gracefully, while Psyche happened to glance at the crown prince on the stage. Her heartbeat immediately quickened. But the competition had to continue, and Psyche proposed an extremely people-pleasing suggestion. The core of this policy was to serve the lower classes. It seemed very earnest on the surface, but unfortunately, this strategy was unrealistic. While Medea was secretly watching His Majesty's reaction, she suddenly noticed the deranged crown prince give a sinister smile. Medea thought it was only her imagination, so she calmly continued answering, using her clearest voice to present the most timely and effective strategy. Sure enough, the Emperor became greatly interested in this strategy and was so excited that he stood up directly from a seat. He praised Medea as being just as outstanding as her father. Medea had originally thought that she would be the winner of the selection contest, and she indeed became the final victor. But what she never expected was that the deranged crown prince would still shamelessly cheat. For example, right now, there was already a mysterious woman below the stage stirring up the crowd. She said that Psyche was truly pitiful, was holding a contest with an already decided outcome simply to highlight Lady Medea. Psyche's unrealistic yet highly seductive speech from just now had also won over the hearts of the lower class people. Medea had not realized this at all, and was still enthusiastically drinking tea together with the hypocritical Psyche. Seeing that Psyche looked unwell, Medea asked her why she was unhappy. Helio, who had long guessed the reason for everything, decided to shift the focus and first escort Psyche away from the ducal residence. The nanny sighed that Helio was still uneasy about Psyche, but Helio said that he felt Psyche was the type to betray friendship for love. Welcome to this grand emotional spectacle, the temptation of the deranged crown prince. As it happened, that day was the day of the crown princess investiture ceremony, and the nanny encouraged Medea not to be nervous. After she became engaged to the crown prince, the nanny would make delicious pumpkin pie and wait for her to return. Psyche was amused by the nanny, who doted on her. She happily set off together with her father, and on the way, she casually put an opportunistic fence-sitter in their place. Soon, His Holiness the Pope arrived. Before the ceremony began, Medea wanted to ask Psyche whether she had been in contact with the crown prince. But Psyche pretended to be magnanimous and said that what Medea was worried about would definitely not happen. Even if she did have feelings for the crown prince, she would still abide by the final result. Helio, dressed all in black and hidden among the crowd, personally witnessed Psyche's lie. It seemed Medea truly had foreseen things like a god. Even at the very last moment, they could not lower their guard. Because the public opinion at this moment was simply too strange, commoners were full of complaints and were all seeking justice for the delicate Psyche. Helio discovered that this sudden outbreak of public opinion was connected to a red-haired woman. But what happened next made Helio give up on capturing the red-haired woman. Because even though Medea was the final winner of the crown princess selection, she did not receive the Pope's approval. The kindly Pope, with a gentle expression, invited Miss Psyche onto the stage to receive his coronation as crown princess. This result shocked everyone present. Some people in the crowd even began spreading that this result was something the Pope had foreseen with his prophetic ability, and that what the empire needed was the true crown princess. The deranged crown prince also began acting at just the right moment. He ran off the stage to kiss Psyche. He even said that during the final competition, Psyche's exaggerated speech had moved him, and from that moment, the crown prince knew that Psyche was the one destined to illuminate the empire. Before becoming crown prince, he was first and foremost a man, so he wanted to be with the person he loved forever. Immediately afterward, the deranged crown prince knelt on one knee and proposed to Psyche. This performance, dressed up under the banner of breaking free for love, made all the injustice seem perfectly justified. Everyone cheered together for the love between the crown prince and Psyche, except for Medea, who was supposed to receive the crown princess's coronation. At this moment, if Psyche refused to become crown princess, then Medea would still have time to turn things around. Unfortunately, Psyche finally revealed her true face. With a blissful expression, she accepted the proposal. As expected of a fated pair, Psyche and the crown prince were both shameless scoundrels. Psyche, who clearly had nothing, still took everything from Medea. When Medea returned home, she discovered that her enraged father was actually beating her nanny. Medea wanted to step forward and beg for mercy, but the nanny told her to run quickly. Seeing that the vicious duke's hammer was about to smash into the nanny's head, Medea suddenly threw herself forward and blocked the fatal blow for her. This left Medea unconscious for a full week. When she finally woke up, she discovered that the nanny had already been beaten to death by her father. Helio wanted to stop it, but he was powerless. Medea brought the nanny's body back from the valley, constantly listening to hear whether the nanny would make any sound. Medea felt that the nanny should still be alive, but the silence shattered every illusion, and Medea finally realized that she had lost everything. She cried out loud like a wounded beast, and Helio beside her could not help shedding tears for her as well. Although all of this looked incomparably tragic, Helio knew that the mastermind behind it all was the deranged crown prince, who had secretly manipulated everything. This is the smartest woman I have ever seen. With just a few words, she could throw the entire hall of nobles into panic. Covered in blood, Medea arrived at the scene of the crown prince's birthday banquet. With a wronged and pitiful expression, she recounted how she had just been attacked and nearly murdered by villains. And her tone and demeanor were exactly the same as that silly, sweet Psyche. In social settings, words are blades. Yet judging by Psyche's usual temperament, she only needed to tell the truth about what had happened to her, and that alone was enough to make everyone indignantly speak up for her. The deranged crown prince never expected that his fiancée, who should have been killed, would still be able to bring him such a huge storm of public opinion. In order to stop Medea from continuing to describe the details of how she was hunted down, the crown prince rushed forward in one stride, grabbed Medea by the shoulders, and asked exactly who had taken her away. How could that person dare use his name to do something so cruel to the crown princess? Medea, with innocent tears streaming down her face, said it was a woman with gray hair and narrow eyes, who had taken her to a place where she and the crown prince often met in secret. As Medea spoke, she suddenly turned optimistic again, saying that fortunately, almost no one usually went there, or else something truly terrible would have happened. These seemingly casual words and actions had actually already stirred up heated discussion among the nobles present. The crown prince's face turned ashen instantly. He ordered that the banquet, which had originally been planned to last 7 days, be ended immediately today, and that from this moment on, all nobles were to be placed under house arrest. The crown prince declared with absolute certainty that someone must be plotting rebellion if they dared assassinate the crown princess. When the common people heard this news, they were speechless on the spot. They had simply come to attend a banquet properly. Yet they had run into such a terrifying incident, and the crown prince still would not allow them to go home. However, the thief-crying thief of a crown prince said that whoever caused more trouble would be arrested as a criminal. Afterward, the crown prince held the frail crown princess, who seemed too weak to care for herself. He arranged for her to go home and recover, while as for the real culprit, the crown prince naturally intended to personally inspect how his shadow guards had died. Unfortunately, Medea had long since predicted the crown prince's thoughts. She had arranged for Helio to stay behind very early on and fake injuries on the dead shadow guards, so that her true abilities would not be exposed. In the end, the coroner concluded that the culprit possessed extremely great strength, either a short man or a physically strong woman. Unexpectedly, the deranged crown prince, whose plan had been completely disrupted, was so unwilling to accept it. He struck the gray-haired shadow guards head 2 more times, only stopping after confirming the person was truly dead. Only then did the deranged crown prince feel overwhelming fury. Meanwhile, Helio, having just finished staging the scene, hurried back to the main hall with Psyche. Unfortunately, they had returned too late, and the main hall had already been sealed off. The only way was to climb over the wall, and Helio suddenly thought of an idea. But he was still hesitating over whether to do it, when Psyche said that since their lives were already at stake, they should use any method available first. So, the searching guards saw the following scene before their eyes. Helio was actually passionately kissing Psyche on the balcony. Because the guards had opened the door with far too much noise, Psyche pretended that her intimate moment had been interrupted and sternly scolded the tactless guard. The guard could only aggrievedly finish delivering the crown prince's order that guests were not allowed to linger. Then he slipped behind the main gate and silently watched the romantic display. The woman before your eyes, her face full of determination, is Psyche after swapping souls with Medea. Just one day ago, she was still a love-struck girl obsessed with the crown prince's beauty. But after Psyche and Helio shared a passionate kiss last night, she seemed to have developed a great interest in Helio. For self-preservation and also because she wanted to get closer to Helio, Psyche said she wanted to learn swordsmanship and wondered whether that would arouse suspicion. Helio, however, thought that no one else knew the Duke's daughter's true level of swordsmanship, so practicing with a sword would not be anything strange. The maid waiting outside the window to attend to them, meanwhile, was enthusiastically gossiping about Helio and Psyche. Helio, on the other hand, complained with a troubled expression that scandalous rumors had actually spread about him and Psyche. Psyche pretended to know nothing and said that she, too, was troubled by the matter. Medea stared blankly out the window. The first round between her and the Yandra crown prince had already come to an end. That gray-haired shadow guard, who refused to reveal the mastermind even unto death, was hung on the city wall by the crown prince as a public warning. Psyche's father hurried in and demanded to know why his daughter wanted to learn swordsmanship for no reason. Medea merely said that the crown prince had already agreed, and with that, she dismissed the count who sought glory by selling out his daughter. But then the count asked Medea why she had cut his daughter's hair short. Medea smiled and replied that naturally, it was because her state of mind had changed. Psyche had nothing to do in the Duke's mansion, so she used her divine power to heal the Duchess, who longed for her daughter to rise high, but was frail and often ill. She had already decided to continue living on under the identity of the Duke's daughter. After all, the crown prince was determined to kill her. Psyche decided to first understand the layout of the Duke's mansion, as well as what kind of person Medea, the original Duke's daughter, really was. She secretly rummaged through Medea's belongings. Soon, she discovered a locked coded diary with a key placed beside it. Just as Psyche was about to open it and see what secrets were hidden inside the diary, she unexpectedly found a necklace. It was simply too beautiful. Psyche directly put it on around her neck. She even grumbled about why Miss Medea had never told her about the necklace's existence. When they arrived at the training ground, Helio told Psyche to listen carefully because he would only teach it once. Psyche said shakily that she would give it a try. Seeing Psyche wearing Medea's face while learning swordsmanship from him, Helio could not help but recall what it had been like when Medea used to teach him swordsmanship. He felt that this emotion was very strange, as if he were returning all his knowledge to his teacher. As a beginner, Psyche performed fairly well while practicing sword techniques. Even Helio could not help praising her a few times, and Psyche was thrilled when she heard it. She said that she was now ready to work hard to keep living. But Helio stared at Psyche's neck, deep in thought, because the necklace she was wearing was a relic left behind by Miss Medea's nanny, which was ironic to the extreme. It was precisely because of Psyche's inaction that the nanny had been beaten to death by that scumbag Duke. And now she was wearing the nanny's necklace while learning swordsmanship from Medea's childhood friend. Helio stopped teaching and looked at Psyche gloomily. As for Medea, she was desperately trying to come up with a plan to defeat the crown prince in one decisive blow. But because Psyche's brain was simply too inadequate, Medea often worked so hard that her nose bled. Never had anyone seen such a powerful woman. Even after injuring one eye, she could still kill an extremely formidable assassin within just a few minutes. Medea was attacked by assassins in a small forest. Even though Medea fought 1 against 6, she was now inside Psyche's frail body, so when dealing with those assassins, she inevitably found herself lacking strength. As a result, Medea was wounded in the eye by one of the assassins after one careless moment. This assassin looked extraordinarily fierce. He did not care at all what would happen to his own body. He only wanted to kill Medea as quickly as possible. But the powerful Medea, even after losing her strength, still relied on her tenacious will to hold on until the end. Relying on the sensation under her body, she discovered there was a small mound of dirt on the ground. Then Medea used the momentum to turn the force against him, and despite being nearly blind in one eye, she drove her blade viciously into the assassin's heart. Before dying, the assassin muttered that this was not what that person had said. Medea thought he was already about to die and was just preparing to get up and leave. But she was counter-killed by the sinister and cunning assassin with a poisoned dagger, and Helio, who rushed over in haste, discovered that he was still too late. His beloved Medea had already died beneath an evildoer's blade. He recalled a time when he had performed especially well. Miss Medea decided to give Helio a reward But when she asked what he wanted, Helio's cheeks reddened, and he said he wanted to eat crayfish with pickled chili flavor. Medea thought Helio's request was utterly outrageous. Where was she supposed to order takeout at dawn? Helio, however, said that if that was the case, then let me see what you look like when you're asleep. Because whether it was dawn or deep into the night, he would come climb through Medea's window. And Medea was always awake reading. So Helio had always wanted to see what Miss Medea looked like when she was asleep. Now, Helio's wish had come true. Medea had fallen into an eternal sleep and would never wake again. Overcome with grief, Helio planned to die for love and follow Medea forever. At the critical moment, the foolishly sweet Psyche finally became useful and stopped Helio from killing himself. And she also said, Medea is not dead. Medea indeed still had one final breath left. She questioned Psyche, asking how it felt to receive the god's favor. Because the crown prince sent people to assassinate you, and I am about to use your body to die in your place. Psyche said sadly, I'm sorry. Medea asked her what exactly she was apologizing for. Was it for being forced to be hunted down by shadow guards? Or for the soul swap? Or perhaps for stealing the position of crown princess that had originally belonged to Medea? All of these had caused Medea immense suffering, but Medea did not resent Psyche, only because all the harm she was enduring at this moment came from the schemer hiding in the shadows. Medea wanted to keep questioning her, but she could no longer open her mouth. In the end, she died after all. Psyche also finally realized that the only one who truly wanted to use her was the Yandra crown prince, the one who knew her best. The person who wanted her assassinated was actually her fiancé, and Psyche cried until she could barely make a sound. Her only friend had died in her place during an assassination attempt, and the one who ordered the assassination was precisely the fiancé who wanted to get rid of her. So, had Medea really perished just like that? After death, she returned to the pool from the day their souls were exchanged, as if she were seeing the memories of Psyche's entire life. There, she unexpectedly saw Psyche's miserable childhood. Psyche's biological mother had always told her that her birth was special. If people discovered that she was a child blessed by the gods, then those whose eyes were blinded by desire would come to kill Psyche. To the young Psyche, she did not care at all about any blessing of the gods. She was only interested in everything inside fairy tale books. That was why Psyche's mother had so successfully raised her into a hopeless romantic, filling her mind only with thoughts of marrying a prince and then living happily together. And Psyche had always longed for the outside world. Finally, one day, Prince Charming rescued Psyche, who had always lived in the basement. Her father even congratulated Psyche on finally escaping her sea of suffering. Psyche ran off to find the crown prince who had helped her, and shouted loudly, "A ruse! You are my god!" Then, just like that, Psyche was mentally controlled by the Yandra crown prince. He even wanted Psyche to cut ties with Medea, her only friend. After watching those memories, Medea could not help smashing her fist against the wall. How could this possibly lead to happiness? At this point, Medea completely understood. There were simply too many rotten people around Psyche. If she wanted even a moment of peace, the only thing she could do was play dumb. But that had also hurt the innocent Medea. Very soon, Medea guessed the wish Psyche had made on the day of the prayer gathering. That foolish sweetheart felt she owed too many people, so she wished for herself to die. And Medea wished to take everything from Psyche. Through a cruel twist of fate, Medea became the very image of beauty, strength, and tragedy, and nearly died in the Yandra crown prince's scheme. But fortunately, Psyche possessed a divine ability, the power to bring the dead back to life. After Psyche devoutly kowtowed 3 times before the gods, the blood from Psyche's forehead dripped onto the magical necklace the crown prince had given her. That necklace had originally been a sacred object meant to grant safe and smooth wishes, so after it quickly reacted with the blood, a dazzling light swept past Medea's side. And just like that, Medea was reborn. But the very first thing the strong Medea did after being reborn was actually to go seek revenge on that dog of a crown prince, rather than rest and recover first. Even Helio could not help sighing that Medea was far too hardworking. It would be such a waste if someone like her were not the heroine. Medea asked what exactly had happened just now. Psyche explained the whole sequence of events in full, and the sacred object she mentioned also aroused Medea's suspicion. Then, combined with the assassin's dying words, "This is not what that person said," Medea immediately deduced the truth. So the Yandra crown prince had approached Psyche in order to seize her divine power to raise the dead. And the reason for all the tragedies that had happened now was precisely this carefully orchestrated series of schemes by the Yandra crown prince. Now that she had already locked onto her target for revenge, Medea would definitely make the crown prince pay the price. She had Helio hand her a short sword. Then she had herself disguised to look covered in blood, so that she could return to the crown prince's birthday banquet and give him a fright he would never forget for the rest of his life. Meanwhile, the Yandra crown prince was drinking red wine while celebrating. Today, not only had he obtained divine power, he had also killed Psyche, that foolish fiancé. But the next second, Medea, using Psyche's body, appeared before the Yandra crown prince. Everyone began talking at once. saying that the crown princess had actually been attacked. And the Yandra crown prince was so frightened he nearly had a heart attack on the spot. Every ghost you fear is someone dearly missed by another. Medea had always deeply missed her nanny, who had loved her dearly, and she had even asked Psyche, who possessed divine power, whether she could save someone who had already been dead for a very long time. But Psyche had said that those with fatal injuries and those already dead were both very difficult to bring back to life. As for Miss Medea's resurrection, it could only be counted as a miracle. That day, Medea lowered her head in silence and murmured softly, "So it still won't work," while burying her sorrow deep in her heart. Helio knew just how much Medea cherished her nanny, so when Psyche unknowingly put on the necklace that had belonged to the nanny, he immediately tore the necklace from Psyche's neck and left without even turning his head. But selfish Psyche only worried that after Helio took the necklace away, she would no longer be able to keep pretending to be the Duke's daughter, and would thus arouse suspicion. However, Helio paid Psyche no attention at all. That evening, a maid came to report that she had already put the necklace back into the drawer. With tears in her eyes, she happily said, "It's the first time I've seen you wear that necklace, because you could never bear to touch it and would only gaze at it in sorrow." After all, the nanny had died in such an absurd way. You must have been lonely every single night. When Psyche heard those words, she was clearly a little stunned. Her slow little mind finally remembered that the Duke household's nanny had not appeared for a very long time. And the necklace from today was precisely the one the nanny had worn most often while alive. Putting all the clues together now, it turned out that the nanny had actually been killed because of Psyche. On the other side, the Yandra crown prince whom Psyche could not stop thinking about was investigating the person who had saved the crown princess's life. Because Medea had deliberately misled the crown prince and provided false information, the search had reached an impasse. The Yandra crown prince was obviously very dissatisfied with this result. He came to Medea's bedside, and the old maid said with emotion, "The crown princess has been having nosebleeds all the time lately, and she only just managed to fall asleep." But the Yandra crown prince did not care about that in the slightest. He simply could not understand whether there was some problem with the illusion butterfly he had created. Very soon, that butterfly entered Medea's dream, guiding Medea toward a mysterious place. Seeing her nanny neatly dressed, Medea was overjoyed. The nanny had finally come to see her in a dream. A conscious Medea begged her nanny to say something to her quickly, but the nanny remained silent from beginning to end. Medea had no choice but to mutter softly to the nanny by herself. She did not know whether she should return to her original body, nor did she know why she kept hesitating. She hoped the nanny could make the choice for her. But instead of answering Medea's question, the nanny only said, "Miss Run." That scumbag Duke had finally deigned to eat with his daughter. But the very first thing he said was that he was going to sell his daughter to King Hain. Psyche looked at the marriage proposal in disbelief. If she married this king, she would have to leave the empire forever. Recalling what Helio had previously told her about the kingdom of Hain, it turned out that Hain had once been a country that invaded the empire. Unfortunately, the new king was now trying to erase that history. That was why he wanted to whitewash things and, under the excuse of love at first sight, marry the Duke's daughter as a bargaining chip in a political marriage. What kind of devil of a father was this? Forcing his own daughter to marry for peace. The Duke was actually forcing his own biological daughter to marry the Hain king, who was called a Little Japan. Psyche refuted the scumbag Duke, saying that marriage was something that should be treated with caution. Before Psyche could say much more, the Duke flipped the table over in one motion and warned his daughter not to push her luck, daring to disregard the other royals. Psyche was so frightened that she did not dare speak. But the scumbag Duke kept rambling on, questioning how Psyche had once again ended up in a scandal with Helio. Could it be that his clever daughter had already learned of his plan in advance? Psyche's dull mind simply could not process that much information, and the scumbag Duke did not want to beat his daughter to death and then be unable to answer to the King of Hain. So, just as before, he turned his aggression toward the maid. The Duke once again picked up his polo mallet, preparing to beat to death the little maid who was protecting her mistress. And everyone else merely watched coldly. The overly compassionate Psyche immediately rushed over and shielded the little maidservant. The Duke instantly lost interest, but sneered, saying that this scene was exactly the same as when your nanny died. Psyche could hardly believe her ears. So Miss Medea's closest nanny had actually been killed in this way. At this moment, Medea had also already woken from her dream. She still had no choice but to continue pretending to be Psyche and share a hypocritical embrace with the crown prince, but Medea felt nothing but disgust. She kept reminding herself that the person she had to take revenge on was right in front of her. That sickly obsessive crown prince must also believe that the crown princess had absolutely no power to resist. So Medea hesitated, wondering whether she should kill her enemy right now and bring all of this to an end ahead of time. And after killing him, it would be best to set a fire to destroy the evidence. But Medea hesitated for a long time, and in the end decided that only when the crown prince suffered as much as she had would she deal the fatal blow, because only then would her revenge feel satisfying enough. Because of what had happened during the day, Psyche curled up under the blanket and cried nonstop. She finally understood how terrible a mistake she had made. Even more awkwardly, a year ago, Psyche had actually gone to find Medea, and at the time she had questioned Medea, asking why she would abandon precious friendship for false power. But back then, Medea had not killed Psyche to vent her anger. She had only given a cold smile, then continued sinking into gloom, and now in hindsight, Psyche finally understood just how heartbroken Medea had been at that time. And the cause of all of this stemmed entirely from her so-called love. Staying in the mansion was simply too suffocating. Psyche decided to go find Helio the next day to discuss what to do next. She did not know what she could still do now. Merely staying alive safely in Miss Medea's identity was far from enough. When the carriage passed through the marketplace, a group of people blocked the way in front of it. They shouted loudly, asking whether they were still expected to make way for the Duke's daughter. Only after getting out of the carriage did Psyche realize that everyone was actually looking at her with hostile eyes. In the distance, a child even threw a stone at her, shouting that she was a murderer. She had absolutely no idea why things had turned out this way. She planned to quietly walk to the village entrance by herself, then find another carriage to continue her journey. But at the entrance to a market alley, she saw someone performing a puppet show. A puppet in the likeness of Miss Medea was being branded a witch, while Psyche and the crown prince had instead become the kind-hearted good people. The storyteller said that the Duke's daughter wanted to destroy everything that should have belonged to the crown princess, so she had deliberately sent people to assassinate the crown princess. Psyche could hardly believe everything before her eyes. Their story had actually been twisted into a joke. Even worse, the true victim had somehow become the perpetrator. That day, the crown princess's father came to visit Medea and told her that the crown prince had built a greenhouse for her. Medea said that since she was already outside, could she take a little more walk? But this request was sternly refused by the count, because he felt that his daughter was far too delicate, and with the rain pouring so heavily outside, it was too dangerous for Medea. The countess told the count not to frighten the child. To comfort Medea, she also told her an amusing piece of gossip. That was that the Duke's daughter and Marquis Helio had fallen in love. Hearing this made Medea's brows knit even tighter. Could it be that Psyche was going to steal her man again? Medea soon went to see the sickly obsessive crown prince. However, the sickly obsessive crown prince was not there to keep her company and drink tea in the greenhouse prison. He deliberately brought up the matter of the oracle to Medea. The sickly obsessive crown prince said that Medea was someone favored by the gods. Perhaps she had already heard the answer given by the gods. Medea thought that this oracle was related to the soul swap between herself and Psyche. She was extremely worried that this secret would be exposed. And after the sickly obsessive crown prince left, the sharp-minded Medea immediately realized that she needed an assistant to help her escape from the count's residence, so she could further investigate news about the oracle. Just when Medea was feeling deeply unsettled, a freckled maid walked over and reminded her to finish her tea and return to her room, so she would not catch cold. Medea thought to herself that this was like a pillow arriving just when she was drowsy. A ready-made spy had delivered herself to her door. Before the soul swap, this freckled maid had once stolen Medea's belongings. At the time, Medea had been furious, so she had sent her to act as a spy beside Psyche. So now, Medea likewise had a way to make Freckles serve as the sickly obsessive crown prince's informant. Sure enough, just as Medea had expected, Freckles stole her belongings once again. Medea sternly rebuked her, saying she actually dared to steal from the royal family. As expected of a habitual thief, Freckles immediately said that it was the Duke's daughter who had ordered her to steal the money. But Medea shot back at Freckles. Exactly how much longer do you expect me to tolerate you? On the day of the prayer meeting, you also said that the Duke's daughter killed a servant, but it was clearly you who killed the person. Freckles, however, stiffened her neck and stared at Medea with that kind of look that refused to admit wrongdoing no matter what. She even shouted, asking why Medea was slandering an innocent person like her. Medea could not be bothered to waste any more words on this liar. After all, Freckles had previously lied to Medea too, saying that someone in her family was ill and that she urgently needed money. Medea directly ordered Freckles to resign and leave. Hearing this, Freckles instantly realized that things were very bad. If she were driven away from the count's daughter, what good place could she possibly go in the future? But Medea turned and went downstairs, simply waiting for the freckled maid to take the bait, so that she could once again use her as a spy. After counting down 5 numbers in her heart, Freckles, sure enough, lunged forward and directly grabbed hold of Medea. She swore to her that for the rest of her life, she would never betray Miss again. And this reaction was exactly what Medea had hoped for. She had never seen such a bold and intelligent woman. Before going out to handle matters, she had actually disguised herself as a foreign girl first. More importantly, she even spoke the foreign language with perfect fluency, so absolutely no one suspected that there was anything unusual about this woman. Medea had long since bribed the freckled maid and had her keep watch for her. Meanwhile, Medea went outside the count's residence to investigate the oracle that the sickly obsessive crown prince had deliberately brought up. Without wasting a moment, Medea seized the gap when the guards changed shifts. Even dragging along this frail body, she still quickly escaped from the count's residence. Inside a tent in the distance, a muscular red-haired man was woken by a manservant who urged him to put on his clothes quickly, or else people would call him the prodigal of the gods again. But the redhead told the manservant not to disturb him over a mere oracle. Could this redhead be the person Medea was looking for? In the end, under the manservant's urging, the redhead still got out of bed unwillingly. However, he muttered that the last time he had heard an oracle was already 3 years ago. The manservant said that everything the redhead said was right, but that for now he should still fasten his buttons and be a graceful, divine messenger. The redhead gave a wicked smile and said that one should only make a grand appearance before distinguished guests. The next second, he directly flipped out the window and left. Medea finally breathed the air outside, and it made even seeing a squirrel feel fresh to her. She quickened her pace and soon arrived at a pawn shop. She pawned the jewelry on her body for 30 gold coins. Then she used the money to buy a set of clothing for a foreign girl. Seeing such a frail woman come into the shop late at night, the clerk found it very strange. But the moment the girl spoke, she spoke authentic O'Neill. Even the color of her eyes matched the signature emerald green of the O'Neill people. The clerk quickly invited the girl inside. The Jepalantis Tavern did not care about status, and anyone could speak freely here. Moreover, Jepalantis gathered the gossip and rumors of the entire empire. So this place should have been very easy to gather news about the oracle. But after Medea looked around, she discovered that no one was mentioning the oracle. It seemed that this time, the oracle had already been monopolized by the nobles. Medea did not know whether the oracle could help her, and Psyche seized that lifeline. As Medea gently shook her head and was just about to head elsewhere to continue gathering information, she suddenly heard someone discussing that King Hain was about to marry the duke's daughter as his queen, while in other people's mouths, she was nothing more than a woman abandoned by the crown prince. Those words still pierced Medea's heart viciously. The red-haired young man walked into the most crowded part of the group, and an older woman warmly called him Pell. The young men and women all swarmed around Pell. At that moment, Pell bumped into Medea as she was passing by. Medea thought resentfully in her heart, was there really no way to untangle this hatred filling her chest? Pell looked at the retreating figure of that beauty, and halfway through his words, his voice stopped as well. Somewhere in the unseen, he felt that a mysterious force was pulling him. For example, the girl who had just brushed past him was very likely the one destined for him. Today was the day the duke's daughter was to marry King Hain. Piles of jewelry and silk were carried into the duke's house as betrothal gifts. King Hain even produced a document. It stated that Hain would grant the duke an equal noble rank within the kingdom, and would bestow upon the duke 1/3 of the empire's diamond mines. But the condition of this gift was within 6 months. As long as the duke's daughter married King Hain, the profit-driven duke did not hesitate in the slightest before signing his name on the document. He even hurriedly asked the king whether this meant he could now obtain all the jewelry and honor. The king asked whether Medea herself, the person concerned, did not need to give her consent, but the duke did not care in the least, since, when selling a daughter required the daughter herself to nod in agreement. King Hain, who had his own ulterior motives, could only smile and echo him. Duke, you are right. But all the clamor outside the window had nothing to do with Psyche. Although she was in Medea's body and was about to be married off in the duke's daughter's identity, she could not feel even the slightest bit of joy. The current Psyche had already understood that the always dominant Medea was in fact only a chess piece in the duke's hands. She could not help sighing that this was no wedding at all today, but clearly Medea's funeral. It was not that Psyche had never thought of resisting, but when she went to Helio for help, Helio said that if all else failed, they should poison the duke. Psyche did not understand why Helio could always think of such crooked methods, but Helio sternly shot back. Otherwise what? How exactly was the deadlock before them supposed to be broken? By relying on the Bedridden Countess, or on me acting in secret, or perhaps by relying on you, Psyche, who are good for nothing. He and Medea had not acted for so long because they were waiting for the best opportunity, but now that they had dragged it out too long, it had instead become even harder to make a move. Psyche felt wronged on Medea's behalf. It turned out that the duke's daughter, whom she had seen as incomparably strong, was also living in a cage just like herself. But if she still did not escape the duke's clutches now, then it really would be too late. So Psyche made a decision that went against all convention, and that was to give the duke, who was urging her onto the wedding carriage, a surprise. At this moment, the one performing a dry, high-platform dive for the duke was precisely that once naive and sweet Psyche. How could the duke possibly tolerate the daughter he intended to trade for wealth dying just like that? He hurriedly urged Psyche to come down at once, but Psyche paid him no heed at all, because Psyche did not truly want to die. She had long since discussed it with Helio, and planned to stage a vanishing act from the balcony, so that she could take the chance to escape this duke's residence full of shackles. In the past, the duke had always used the family's name as a pretext to constantly exploit Medea. He had always been confident that Medea's sword sword would never be pointed at him. But now, Psyche's leap had already awakened the will to resist within Medea's body. Standing high on the balcony in Medea's place, Psyche questioned the Duke about why he had always treated her as a tool. Perhaps it was the pent-up emotions within this body itself, or perhaps at this moment it was no longer only Psyche speaking, but Medea, who had endured through gritted teeth for more than 10 years, and whose blood was now boiling throughout her body. The Duke angrily cursed his daughter as an ungrateful wretch who bit the hand that fed her. Yet in the end, he still failed to catch hold of this money tree he had raised for more than 10 years, because Psyche's body possessed a strong and resilient physique. So, at the very instant she jumped from the balcony, she successfully grabbed a tree branch, then slid down along the trunk. And at that very instant, Medea, who was in the Count's residence, suddenly felt a violent palpitation, followed immediately by an asthma attack that left her barely able to breathe. With a thud, Medea collapsed to the ground and lost consciousness. At the instant she regained consciousness, Medea had actually returned to her own body, although her throat was so dry it felt as if it had been scorched by fire. But when she opened her eyes again, she had returned to Psyche's body. Only after waking did Psyche discover that she had actually broken a bone. She wanted to use her divine power to heal the injury, but found that her divine power had disappeared. While Psyche was escaping, King Hain was sitting in a pavilion leisurely drinking tea, as if he had long expected this scene. He was even still smiling and gently nodded at Psyche. Late at night, Medea was already prepared. Tonight, she was going to secretly investigate the Grand Temple. To keep herself from revealing any flaws, Medea had specially prepared a wig for her spy, the freckled maid. She had her disguise herself as Medea in order to get past the spy nurse arranged by the crown prince. The freckled maid cowered on the bed, whining tearfully and praying that Miss would come back quickly. Helio had already arranged for a priest at the Grand Temple to meet and hand things over with Medea, because the Medea who had previously cooperated with the priest had always used her own body. So now Medea, who was in Psyche's body, had to disguise herself as the way she had looked before. Only in this way could she keep the priest from discovering the secret that she had swapped souls with someone else. Medea soon passed through a marketplace. A little girl's apple rolled to Medea's feet. The girl's mother had wanted her child to gather her courage and ask for the apple back herself. She even taught her to say, "Please give my apple back." But when the mother looked up and saw Medea, her heart skipped a beat. Good heavens, that young lady's earrings looked immensely valuable, almost worth a whole year's food expenses for their family. Afraid of offending an unreasonable noble, the mother quickly lowered her head and apologized. But the little girl, innocent and unaware of the world, still followed her mother's words and continued asking Medea for her apple back. Medea, who was usually hot-tempered, was unexpectedly gentle this time. She not only returned the apple to the little girl, but also told the child's mother that there was no need to kneel. In the end, both the little girl and her mother happily thanked Medea. And this was also the first time Medea had ever heard someone say thank you to her. In the Grand Temple, a meeting concerning the oracle was about to begin. But there just happened to be a red-haired man who could not be woken up no matter what. The high priest had no choice but to make an excuse and tell everyone that the red-haired man was bedridden with illness. What a pity for such a devout child to be injured like this because of the oracle. Therefore, this time, the oracle had to be interpreted perfectly. In the end, the red-haired man was still forcibly dragged out of bed by the guards to attend this oracle assembly convened in the middle of the night. He picked at his ear and only felt that the temple had been far too noisy lately. The guard mocked him, saying, "Do you expect us to find you a quiet place just for you?" Helio, who was hiding in the shadows and eavesdropping, said that he actually preferred livelier places. Medea hurried along the whole way and finally arrived at the Grand Temple. But the carriages ahead had formed a long line, as if someone was inspecting them one by one. She looked carefully and found that the sickly Yandere crown prince was personally acting as security. He was verifying identities one after another. For the dignified crown prince to be doing this sort of thing was absurdly laughable. But a ruse truly did appear before Medea in person, and Medea's carriage was already surrounded by the palace's direct royal knights. Medea immediately realized that the situation had already become terrible in the extreme. She drew her dagger, preparing to fight to the death. The red-haired man finally got up to attend this oracle assembly that concerned the survival of the empire. It was just that on his way there, he happened to run into Helio, who had come to gather information. Being severely germophobic, he covered his nose and complained to the guard, saying that every time that Marquis passed by, he always carried a foul stench, like the bloody smell of a rotting corpse. The cheerful guard, however, said that Marquis Helio was a battle hero. "You'd better stop worrying about that. The other high priests are probably already gathered together bad-mouthing you." Just as the red-haired man reached the door of the conference hall, a loud and forceful voice from a bowl-cut man came from inside. "Pel's actions are simply a blasphemy against the oracle and a betrayal of the nation. He should be dismissed today." Then, in the very next second, the red-haired man pushed the door open and walked in. With that handsome face of his, he instantly silenced the bowl-cut man's slander. The bowl-cut man immediately explained in fear, saying that he had only been joking just now. After all, The red-haired man was the only person in the world who could translate the oracle without needing to consult a dictionary. A formidable life like his needed no explanation. As soon as he arrived, the red-haired man displayed textbook playboy tendencies and warmly greeted the priestess. He even casually asked how the people in her territory were doing, without the slightest intention of starting the meeting. This made the stern, white-bearded old man beside them furious. He viciously ordered the red-haired man to hurry up and translate the oracle. But the red-haired man was not intimidated in the slightest. He grabbed the white-bearded man by the collar and asked whether he was deliberately making things difficult for him just to pocket a huge sum of funding for himself. The white-bearded old man was instantly struck at the heart of the matter and did not dare say another word. However, the white-bearded man's loyal knight declared if the red-haired man kept acting so arrogantly, he would cut him down with a single strike. The red-haired man told the knight to go ahead and try. While Medea was nervously undergoing the security inspection, the crown prince, who was good at acting, started performing in front of the public again. This time, he caught a criminal who trafficked children. Before the judicial authorities could formally deal with the trafficker, the crown prince stabbed straight through the man's heart with one thrust. This action immediately drew cheers from the surrounding crowd, but the quick-reacting Medea was no less capable. She swiftly disguised herself as a knight. She prepared to quietly slip into the grand temple, while the sickly Yandera crown prince was occupied checking the carriages. But the sharp-eyed sickly Yandera crown prince still noticed that strand of purple hair drifting from Medea. Holding to the principle of killing by mistake rather than letting one go, the sickly Yandera crown prince immediately ordered a pursuit of Medea, who had already gone far away. But the clever Medea had already thought of a countermeasure. She deliberately confused the crown prince's knights and made them split up their forces. And the self-righteous sickly Yandera crown prince immediately changed his line of thinking as well. If Medea had come to investigate the oracle, then in the end, she would still return to the Duke's residence. So the sickly Yandera crown prince directly led people to surround the Duke's residence. But what he never expected was that Psyche had already fled the marriage while dragging along Medea's body, because Medea had gone to the grand temple to gather information and was immediately targeted by the crown prince. The sickly Yandera crown prince felt that even if the monk ran away, the temple could not. So he directly led people to the Duke's residence. He demanded that the Duke, who was dead drunk, hand over the daughter who had fled the marriage that day. Fortunately, the Duke still retained a trace of reason and did not allow the crown prince's authority to let him barge into his daughter's bedroom. But in the end, the Duke could not resist the effects of the alcohol and collapsed onto the floor. The sickly Yandera crown prince then directly entered Medea's room to search for her whereabouts. With a sense of smell as sharp as a dog's, the sickly Yandera crown prince caught the scent of blood on Psyche. Putting on an especially concerned expression, he said to Psyche, "Young Lady Duke, you're here. How did you get hurt? Did you do something reckless again?" Psyche did not want to see this former fiancé of hers. After all, just 1 month earlier, the sickly Yandera crown prince had specially sent people to kill her. Fortunately, Medea, who had been in Psyche's body at the time, helped her escape that disaster. And now, Psyche no longer knew what feelings she should use. To face this lover she had once loved so desperately, she asked the crown prince to state his purpose and then leave. But the crown prince only smiled and asked the Duke's daughter in return, "What trick are you playing again? Surely it's not so hot that even your ears are red? Why are you hanging your head so low like someone who has done something wrong?" Psyche was left completely speechless by the crown prince's words. The family that had framed Miss Medea had ordered people to kill her on the day of the banquet, and the one who had once whispered in her ear that he loved her was the same voice. So even though Psyche had become much braver during this period, when facing her beloved, she still could not stop her tears from falling. Psyche even felt that no matter how capable she became, in the face of such worthless love, she would still be easily shattered. She recalled how she used to flirt and banter with the crown prince. She had asked him why he had fallen in love with her, and the crown prince had bluntly answered, "Of course, because you're naive and sweet." Psyche was not satisfied with that answer and told the crown prince to say it again. So the crown prince slickly added, "Because you shine so brilliantly." However, the crown prince before her now was completely different from the person in her memories. He pinned Psyche, whom he believed to be Medea, beside the bed, and his hands were even stained with Psyche's blood. The crown prince said that if back then she had been able to show a shamefaced expression like she was now and look up at him in admiration, perhaps his crown princess would have been her. After hearing those words, Psyche burst into tears once again. However, Medea would never indulge this sickly Yandera crown prince, and the sickly Yandera crown prince would never imagine what this time's oracle under investigation actually was. From the grand temple came sudden news of the high priest's passing. Everyone was busy handling the priest's funeral matters, at a loss for what to do for the moment. The red-haired man started talking with the guard about the content of the oracle. When he heard that the oracle foretold the empire's destruction, the guard was visibly stunned. How could there be such a bizarre oracle? But the red-haired man explained clearly that the one closest to the heart of the Epirine Empire would cause the empire's lands to be torn apart. According to the red-haired man's own speculation, there were only 2 people closest to the heart of the empire. One was the sickly Yandera crown prince Aruz. in the prime of his life. The other was Psyche, who had received the blessing of God. However, the person inside Psyche's body was the all-capable Medea. So in the end, the empire would very likely be destroyed because Medea stabbed the crown prince to death. What kind of situation was this exactly? How could anyone, while inside the body of a romantic rival, hear her own fiancé say "I love you" to her? And yet, Psyche just happened to encounter exactly that. Not only was she forcibly kissed by the crown prince, she was also promised that he would always stand on her side. If Psyche had not undergone the soul swap with Medea, then hearing those words would absolutely have made her so happy she could fly, and she would have become even more determined to be a simple love-struck girl. Psyche even once imagined that perhaps the crown prince already knew that she was the real Psyche, that now he was merely confirming whether Psyche and Medea had truly swapped souls. But ideals are full, while reality is painfully thin. Unlike Helio, the crown prince could not identify at a glance whether the person before him was the one he loved just from the slightest movement of the fingers. The crown prince always believed that the person inside Medea's body was still Medea. Psyche asked, "Your Highness, have you never loved Psyche at all?" The crown prince stroked Psyche's hand and said lightly, "You have a good eye." At that moment, Psyche's heart finally shattered completely. After the crown prince left, Psyche lay on the bed and cried uncontrollably by herself. With her foolishly sweet, love-brained personality, as long as the crown prince had admitted that the one he loved was Psyche, then Psyche probably would have laid everything bare. But now, when she thought back on the crown prince, his kiss, and all those promises from the past, Psyche only felt nauseated, especially because before leaving, the crown prince had also said to the duke's daughter that she absolutely must not give up the position of crown princess. Psyche guessed that he would definitely try to assassinate her again, but once a woman gets angry, her intelligence often shoots straight up to the maximum. By that time, Psyche would make all the necessary preparations and thoroughly crush this scheming crown prince. Helio finally saw the Medea he had longed for day and night. After they met, they held each other tightly. Helio could not help but feel heartache for his beloved. It had only been a few days, and yet you had grown thinner again. To you, the Count's residence is practically like a prison. But more importantly, he had to bring the intelligence to Medea, and Medea asked Helio whether he had already found out the oracle. But all of a sudden, her head began to ache violently, as though her whole being were about to be dragged into a vortex. It seemed that Psyche's soul was like a Bluetooth connection. Even when it was not inside the body, it would still send commands to the body when overwhelmed by grief and fury. Helio then quietly rested against Medea's knees and patiently waited for her to recover a little. Only then did he present the oracle to her. Now, after exhausting herself and going to great lengths, Medea had finally obtained the oracle from the crown prince's mouth, the one concerning the survival of the empire, and she was clearly delighted. However, right after Medea finished interpreting the oracle, she suddenly became furious and cursed in a low voice that some guardian deity was utterly useless. Helio was also puzzled as to why Medea, who was always composed and calm, had suddenly erupted in anger. It turned out that what truly shocked Medea was this: the one closest to the heart of the Epirene Empire would cause the land to split and collapse. This was actually the completed oracle, and also Medea's inference. The ones referred to here should be Psyche and Crown Prince Aruz. If Aruz also learned of this oracle, he would certainly make a deadly move against Psyche and use the opportunity to package himself as a hero. It seemed that the sickly Yandra Crown Prince had suddenly gone to the Duke's residence to see the Duke's daughter and tell her to continue competing for the position of Crown Princess, likely because he had other calculations in mind. Do you still remember the lie Medea once made when she was being hunted by the Crown Prince in order to hide her strength? At that time, the Crown Prince asked who had suddenly appeared and saved Medea. Medea casually made up a person, a man who seemed to be wearing a floor-length cloak, abnormally tall, and with red hair. What no one expected was that the other party actually matched every single one of the traits in the persona Medea had fabricated. Was this not a scapegoat sent down from heaven? Now, what was needed was someone who could deal the sickly Yandra Crown Prince a fatal blow, someone of high status and sufficient authority. And this person could not be His Grace, who had once betrayed Medea. At this life and death moment, something happened that the Crown Prince had never anticipated. A red-haired man stood at the very front of the church. While the scene was full of noisy voices and constant chatter, everyone was discussing why His Grace had not driven him out, and why the clothes on him were so eye-catching. His Grace even asked the red-haired man whether it really had to be made public here, saying it was all too sudden. But the red-haired man insisted that the time had come, and the prodigal son of God could only have everyone quiet down. Immediately after that, he revealed the red-haired man's true identity to everyone present. Please revere him as you revere me. From this day forward, Pell will assist me in the capacity of cardinal. The Crown Prince had already been waiting outside the door for Pell for a long time. Awkwardly but still smiling, he said, "I thought you would hide your identity for the rest of your life." Standing before the Crown Prince, Pell looked down at him from above and said, "You've actually used an honorific for me for once." But the Crown Prince did not answer Pell's question directly, and instead brought up when he had returned to the city. What he did not expect was that Pell had already seen through his little schemes. Leaning close to the Crown Prince's ear, he whispered, Hasn't your highness already planted trusted subordinates to arrive here without being a second late? Is it because you're afraid your mask will be torn off in front of everyone? The knight guarding nearby thought Pell was about to harm the crown prince and immediately drew his sword against him. The crown prince also could not afford to openly fall out with him in public, so he could only order the knight to lower the sword. Even so, the crown prince still sneered viciously at Pell, saying that he was nothing more than a cardinal in name only. The temple guards would never come to protect him, but the temple guards were not for show either, and their leader immediately warned the knight order not to make trouble in the temple. At once, the crown prince did not dare utter another harsh word. Before leaving, as if suddenly remembering something, he warned Pell not to covet someone else's crown princess. Pell frowned. Could the crown prince be talking about Psyche? Helio was reporting the final piece of news to media. King Hain apparently still had not given up on Psyche and was plotting something again. He had even asked a jeweler to help prepare medicine that would aid in healing. Media also felt that this matter was not simple, so they guessed whether Hain might knock Psyche unconscious and take her away in order to establish diplomatic ties with the empire. Media felt that before Psyche's foot injury fully healed, there would probably be no way to hold the wedding. Just as Medea had put on her cloak and was about to leave, she was stopped at the carriage door by Pell, who had rushed over. "We've met before, haven't we, miss?" Only then did Medea realize that Pell was the red-haired man who had followed her yesterday. Although Medea did not say a single word, Pell kept rambling on. He said that it was love at first sight for him, and that when he could not see her, his mood became unbearably low. But this kind of straight man, brute force behavior, was probably incapable of moving a beauty's heart at all. "This is the most outrageous way of chasing a girl I have ever seen." He actually jammed the girl's carriage door shut with his foot, and even loudly shouted that the girl was a murder. Pell had finally managed to wait for Medea's carriage. With a keen sense of smell as sharp as a dog's, he detected the scent of Medea's soul. "You have no idea how much I regretted it after missing you. I thought that if I could meet you once again, then it must be fate." These sudden words from Pell actually sounded somewhat normal, but in the very next second, he said to the bewildered Medea, "I absolutely cannot miss you, murder." Medea was practically so exasperated that she laughed. Was it reasonable to speak so viciously to a beautiful girl in the middle of the night? And he even pierced the carriage window with a wooden stick. Yet Pell said righteously that he could see the shadow of the victim hidden within Medea's soul. Medea instantly realized that this man was far from simple, so with a flash, she darted several meters away. Unfortunately, Pell was even faster than she was. He even leisurely started showing off with his staff. "From the way you dodge, I can tell how strong you are. Since you have skill, then fight me in a proper duel." Watching Pell make such wild boasts, Medea truly wanted to ask when exactly someone like this had appeared in the empire. A sword lay horizontally between the two of them. The two people about to begin a life and death duel moved at the same time. But Medea was still in Psyche's body at this moment, so compared with the tall Pell, she was ultimately still a bit weaker. Medea only managed to grab the scabbard, but Pell truly managed to seize the blade itself. Pell, glad that he had the upper hand, swung the sword at Medea the next second. But with a quick sidestep, Medea still withstood the descending blade Pell was about to bring down. Very soon, Medea also discovered that Pell's attacks actually had no structure at all, and he was not even truly aiming for her vital points. So she came up with a bold guess. This steel straight man probably would not really deal her a killing blow. In order to end Pell's boring and embarrassingly Chinibi contest as quickly as possible, Medea directly rammed herself toward Pell's sword. As expected, Pell instantly withdrew the sword he had swung and even cursed Medea, asking if she was crazy. Taking advantage of this opening, Medea once again used her swift movement technique and successfully escaped Pell's outrageous and crazy pursuit. The guards who hurried over found Pell and asked whether he had seen the woman's face clearly. Pell said she had wrapped herself too tightly and that all that commotion just now had been completely useless. In her sleep, the injured Psyche felt a force flowing into her body. She even felt that the power had completely become her own. Psyche looked at her injured leg. She decided to test just how strong this power really was and also ease the pain a little. However, her confidence was crushed the very next second after a warm current flowed through the wound. Psyche removed the bandage, only to discover that the injury on her leg had actually become even worse. The saddened Psyche did not cry endlessly the way she used to. She merely buried her head on her knees, neither eating nor drinking. The servants were all speculating that yesterday the Duchess had been bedridden with serious illness, and the Duke had also drunk himself completely senseless. And now the young lady had become like this as well. This is bad. I am afraid the entire ducal household is about to decline from now on. This is truly suffocating. After pulling an all-nighter at work, one cannot even catch up on sleep. Instead, one still has to dress up splendidly to welcome one's enemy. Medea had just returned to the count's estate. A maid then brought news, saying that the crown prince was waiting to see her. Medea had no choice but to suppress her anger and rush toward the crown prince while pretending to be very happy, as if she did not want to kill this bastard with her own hands at all, and instead wanted to be his fangirl. The crown prince said with a smile that it somehow felt as though they had not seen each other for a very long time. But Medea was thinking to herself that 6 hours ago, you were still hunting me down at the temple. Yet all she said aloud was that one day apart felt like 3 autumns. The two of them walked together, exchanging false pleasantries all the way. The crown prince said that after seeing Medea, he had practically forgotten all his troubles and sorrows. Medea said, "I feel the same." However, she gradually sensed that something was off. This time, the crown prince was actually taking a walk alone with her. He had not brought a single attendant. Could he be plotting something again? Sure enough, the crown prince casually picked up a bird from the ground. As if gently coaxing Medea, he said that the bird was weak, pitiful, and helpless, and asked her to save it quickly. Only then did Medea understand that the crown prince was suddenly acting so saintly because he was setting a trap for her, waiting for her to reveal a flaw. That little cutie Helio had started having his late-night emo episode again. He discovered that he seemed to have made the wrong decision yet again, because Helio's subordinate reported that the people he had sent to protect Miss Medea were not enough, and that they had actually been ambushed by an unknown creature. If I had known it would turn out like this, I should have escorted her back personally from the start. He could only think in regret. He even thought back regretfully to how, during the Empire's war 3 years ago, Helio had still made a wrong decision. At that time, the victorious army was preparing to return home, and some soldiers suggested taking a shortcut so they could see their family sooner. Helio voiced his concerns. He did not approve of taking that risk, but Helio could not resist the soldiers' pleading. And in the end, they still took that small road where enemy troops had lain in ambush. Although they still won in the end, quite a few of their former comrades, however, never made it back to the long-awaited home. Then, thinking of the nanny's death, Helio had also failed, after Medea fell unconscious, to protect the nanny with all his strength. But in the end, he was still afraid that the Duke's revenge would destroy everything he had painstakingly built. Helio followed the servants handling the corpse all the way. They struggled to throw the nanny's body down into the cave, but just after those servants finished disposing of it, they were slaughtered by men in black. The servants asked them in horror who they were, but the men in black said, "Our master is the illustrious Duke Belial." Immediately afterward, the Duke's servants had their throats slit, and Helio, who was hiding in the tree and witnessing everything, finally understood that for absolute certainty, that scumbag Duke had actually sent 2 separate groups to silence the nanny. Helio eventually found the nanny's body. She actually still had one final breath left in her. Helio held the nanny's hand and apologized over and over again, but the nanny said that she could understand Helio. In the end, Helio watched with his own eyes as the nanny breathed her last. Although Helio had once imagined that if he could save the nanny and let her live under a false name, perhaps she might be able to reunite with Medea in the future. But in the end, all of that was far too unrealistic, because in the end, the nanny truly could not bear the physical pain anymore and begged Helio to give her a swift end. Even more heartbreaking was the nanny's final sentence. Miss Medea cannot escape her original family. The present Medea looked at the sinister and cunning crown prince and suddenly felt that she seemed to have found a way to switch their bodies back. Psyche was also conducting experiments over and over again according to the method in the book. She unwillingly clutched her own hair, thinking that she absolutely had to successfully control this mysterious power she had just obtained, and then strike the cold-blooded and deceitful crown prince hard. Faced with the crown prince's probing, Medea directly crushed the little bird to death and told the crown prince that even if divine power were used now, it could no longer be saved. But the crown prince gave a cold smile and directly exposed the fact that Medea could not use divinity. Medea played dumb. What do you mean by that? But the crown prince seemed to have already seen through everything. I think it should have something to do with your memory loss. Medea had intended to continue deceiving the crown prince with her acting. Unexpectedly, the crown prince directly ordered people to seize Medea, saying that he would help Medea recover her memories. Medea had no time at all to stop him. She was taken away to the dungeon where Psyche had often stayed as a child. The crown prince even put on a sanctimonious look. He said, "How could the crown princess forget that she is the future empress? If she loses her divinity, she cannot protect the people." Therefore, Medea had to be locked in the dungeon and reflect properly. But in truth, this was clearly just the crown prince's excuse, because before Medea became empress, he would kill her first as a sacrifice to heaven. The crown prince really was skilled at beautifying himself. What kind of trauma therapy was this? And this time, the preparations were even more attentive than on the day of the banquet. Seeing that she could not persuade the crown prince, Medea placed her final hope on Psyche's mother, who had originally remained silent the whole time. But just as the gate was about to close, the mother suddenly fell backward. And at that critical moment, Psyche too because she had forcibly pushed through the limits of her own power, collapsed to the ground covered in blood. She was truly in so much pain that she no longer had any strength, and even thought that if she just sank into sleep like this, perhaps all problems would end. But Psyche once again remembered the advice her mother had given her when she was little. Do not harbor a heart of resentment toward others. At that moment, Psyche suddenly understood something. Since divinity is the vessel of the sacred, one cannot use divinity to harm others. Thus, in an instant, Psyche let go of her hatred toward the crown prince. With a sudden exertion, she finally returned to her original body. As if she had already had a premonition, her mother asked Psyche whether she had come back. Psyche cried tears of joy and said that she had truly come back. But the crown prince's face was full of excitement. He did not even care about the mother-in-law who had just fallen down the stairs. Instead, he kept asking Psyche whether she could use divinity again, whether her memory had also returned, and only at this point did Psyche finally understand how cold this seemingly affectionate man truly was at his core. She smiled and said to the crown prince, "Let's break up." Medea, having returned to her own body, finally realized that the timing had been frighteningly precise. After everything had settled down, Psyche returned to her own room. She recalled the past, when she had wanted to cut her hair short, but the crown prince had said he preferred her with long hair. But this time, Psyche no longer had any reservations at all, and directly cut off that long hair which symbolized restraint. Yet the crown prince still kept thinking over and over, is Psyche angry, so that is why she wants to break up with me? The crown prince, who had always been used to being pursued and fawned over, really was somewhat unaccustomed to being dumped. He even began to suspect that Psyche had fallen for Pell. In order to calm Psyche down, the crown prince lavishly sent her piles of gifts stacked like a mountain. But Psyche chose to throw all those gifts downstairs. If someone sent you a pile of priceless treasures just to beg you not to break up with him, what would you choose? Psyche, who used to be full of thoughts only about romance. Her choice now was to throw all of these priceless treasures away as if they were garbage. In order to beg for reconciliation, the crown prince even sent Psyche an antique from 200 years ago. Psyche smiled as she took it from the guard and then threw it downstairs without even blinking. The guards and maids were all dumbfounded, repeatedly saying that this would not do, that throwing objects from a height was illegal. But Psyche smiled and said, "Then open the next gift for me." In the end, the gifts had practically been thrown away until only one Lake Baikal was left, and the guard said that as long as you sign your name. Before he even finished speaking, the transfer agreement for Lake Baikal was torn to pieces by the generous Psyche, and the guard standing nearby and witnessing everything could only shed silent tears. "You actually could have given it to me." But the last item sent up was something Psyche could not refuse. It was a sharp sword inlaid with diamonds. Psyche gladly accepted it, because if someone tried to assassinate her next time, she would have a way to fight back too. Medea sat in her chair, carefully examining the invitation from the crown prince asking her to attend the palace banquet. Her grip slipped for a moment, and the invitation fell beneath the table. But unexpectedly, she discovered that a book was actually hidden under the table. Curious, Medea opened it and took a look. Only then did she discover that Psyche had actually made notes on it seriously. It seemed that during this period of time, Psyche had truly grown a lot. Later, Medea gradually felt that something was a little off. Psyche had even written words of encouragement to Medea. "Miss Medea, it is not only by becoming crown princess that one can be considered successful. Now that your brother has run away from home, then Medea should become the little princess who carries on the ducal family line." It had to be said that this little scheme of Psyche's really did please Medea. As usual, Helio climbed into Medea's bedroom through the window. After lightly knocking twice on the window, Medea indeed reacted. Only then did Helio realize that the woman he loved had already returned to her own body. The tips of his ears reddened, and he quickly stepped forward to greet her. Medea rubbed his head like petting a puppy, and even said that during this time, Helio had worked hard. That one sentence directly moved Helio so much that his eyes grew hot. Medea and Helio sat facing each other. She quickly noticed that her man had actually developed dark circles under his eyes, and Helio stammered that he had merely had a nightmare. But Medea's face darkened as she asked him whether he was still going to continue lying, since the nanny had died in the Duke's estate. In fact, in order to end the nanny's suffering, Helio had personally strangled her to death. But Helio did not want Medea to know this. However, observant Medea noticed unexplained bruises on the nanny's body, and that scumbag Duke would never knock someone unconscious first, only to then let that person die painlessly. In addition, there had already been flaws in what Helio said that day. So Medea quickly guessed the truth. It was just that she had never wanted to believe it. Among the three people she trusted most, one had betrayed her. One had left her forever, and that person had happened to die at the hands of the third person she trusted most. But now, Medea was already prepared to hear this belated truth, and Helio also told her everything exactly as it had happened. And he was willing to accept any punishment, because his failure to act had also been one of the reasons the nanny died. Medea remembered the nanny's final words, "Run away quickly." but in the end she still had not been able to fulfill the nanny's dying wish. But now was not yet the time to hold Helio accountable. There were still many things they had to do. For example, right now they had to go find that bad-tempered Duke father and beat the hell out of him, make the Duke thoroughly come to his senses, and also tell him that the master of the ducal house should be replaced. Before going to the office, a group of servants with bruised and swollen faces stopped Medea first, because the Duke, who had recently had nothing go right, kept beating and cursing the servants and smashing wine bottles at every turn. Now he was once again drunk out of his mind, and everyone was afraid he might hurt Miss Medea. But Medea walked in without the slightest fear. She stepped forward and gently brushed over her already sleeping father, staring at the ruby on the head of the family seat, which symbolized power and status. Then she looked at the deep wrinkles on her father's hand. Medea muttered in a low voice to her father for a long time, as if she had finally made up her mind to overthrow this scumbag Duke's oppression over the entire family. The heir to the ducal house should be changed. The maids wiped the wounds on Medea's wrists. They also said that lately, it felt as though Miss Medea had become both strong and gentle, making people want to follow and admire her even more. Medea knew that these changes all had Psyche's contribution in them. Only after seeing the changes in the ducal estate with her own eyes did Medea realize that Psyche was actually very clever too. Psyche now especially wanted to eat dessert. The spy nanny said that she would go have the kitchen prepare some right away. But Psyche, who had other plans, wanted to go out and eat instead, so that it would also be convenient to contact Miss Medea. The nanny hesitated for a moment and said she would first go ask the count for permission. Psyche stared blankly at her actions. Perhaps this was her original, everyday life. When she lived as the Duke's daughter, she never needed anyone's permission to do anything. But because of the Crown Prince's compensation mentality, her Count father quickly agreed to let Psyche go out, which made her incredibly happy. But the Crown Prince still secretly instructed the coachman to monitor Psyche's every move, as expected of the Empire's #1 Yandere. But when it comes to scheming, he still cannot compare to Medea. When Psyche arrived at the dessert shop, everyone once again showered her with enthusiastic praise. She had not enjoyed such treatment for a very long time. When she had been in the Duke's daughter's body, all she had received was indifference. Very soon, everyone at the tea gathering began chatting about gossip, and the topic turned out to be that Medea wanted to kill Psyche. Psyche instantly could not listen any longer. These were clearly all slanders against Medea from the Crown Prince. The person who truly wanted to kill Psyche was obviously the Crown Prince. Just then, a vase was knocked over by a maid. Psyche looked toward that maid and discovered that she was actually someone from the Duke's estate. Having grown clever, Psyche immediately guessed that Medea had probably deliberately sent someone to lead her over there. Psyche, who could not wait to see her idol, immediately declined the tea party and ran quickly in the direction where that maid had disappeared. Behind the curtain, Miss Medea was sitting quietly, waiting for Psyche to arrive. Psyche clearly still found it a little hard to believe the scene before her. Miss Medea had actually really returned safely, but clearly now was not the time for reminiscing. The main purpose of Medea calling Psyche here was to figure out exactly how they had switched back into their own bodies. Psyche was still as emotional as ever. She suddenly threw herself into Medea's arms, holding her and weeping as she said, "We really have suffered too much." This time, Medea did not keep a cold face either, but instead gently patted her on the back. After hearing Medea's meticulous plan for how she had lured her here, Psyche was once again overwhelmed by Medea's wisdom. At the same time, she also learned that the coachman who had brought her here was actually a spy. But Medea explained that she had already discovered that long ago. 90% of the people in the Count's estate had already been bought off by the Crown Prince. However, the freckled maid accompanying Psyche today was someone Medea had arranged long ago, so there was no need to worry too much. As Psyche looked at Medea, her eyes instantly reddened again. As Psyche looked at Medea, her eyes instantly reddened again. She said that only now had she truly realized just how insane the Crown Prince really was. What Psyche hoped for most now is to return to being as close and inseparable with Medea as before. Medea also looked towards Psyche with a trace of pity. This time, after personally experiencing Psyche's despairing life of imprisonment, she finally understood Psyche's past betrayal. But Medea still could not understand why, after returning to her own body. Even the traces of her foot injury and poisoning had disappeared as well. Psyche then showed her the divine power she had newly mastered. That hard-to-control power was actually enough to scorch flowers directly. Medea looked at the scene before her in shock. Psyche said that it was precisely by relying on this power that she made her heart stop beating, and the side effect was that her legs were healed. The most important thing now was that Psyche absolutely could not be deceived by that Yandere Crown Prince ever again. Therefore, Medea, without any malice, told her the Crown Prince's true reason for approaching her. That was to take away Psyche's divinity and make the Crown Prince himself the supreme god. So Medea needed Psyche to tell her everything she knew. Looking at Medea's firm gaze, Psyche finally hesitated no longer. She said that she had actually met the Crown Prince when she was little. At that time, in an alley, she had accidentally used divine power to kill a criminal gang. The young Crown Prince happened to walk over and ask Psyche what had happened. Psyche thought she had caused a catastrophic disaster and hurriedly explained that she had not killed them. The Crown Prince's guard also also emerged from the shadows. He said that those people lying on the ground were all vicious criminal gang members. For a moment, Psyche did not know how to face everything before her. But the young crown prince had already mastered a gentle strategy early on, constantly patting Psyche's head to comfort her. He even carefully asked for Psyche's name. And later, Psyche fainted from exhaustion. After hearing all of this, Medea guessed that the Yandra crown prince had probably started targeting Psyche from that time onward. But now, for Psyche, the most important thing was still to protect herself first. Psyche then remembered something, which was that the entire noble circle was now spreading rumors that Medea wanted to kill Psyche. But Medea had no intention of clarifying this matter, because according to her deduction, that Yandra crown prince would definitely find a way to pin every attempted murder of Psyche on her. Because the time was almost up, the coachman began anxiously searching for his young lady, afraid that something might happen. Sensing the coachman's movements, Medea and the maid immediately found a place to hide. Psyche snapped at the coachman. "Are you in such a hurry to go home and stew meat?" Before leaving, Psyche remembered what Medea had said. No matter what rumors spread outside, she would believe me. She had a vague feeling that Medea was about to pull off something huge next, as expected of Medea, who possesses both wisdom and beauty. To deal with her scumbag father, only 3 steps were needed. The first step was to cut off his contact with the outside world. When Count Galt came wanting to see Duke Father, Medea stopped him without changing her expression. The Duke did not understand why his daughter wanted to do this. He felt that perhaps speaking a few words with the Count would make him feel a little better. But Medea used her father's own words to block him. "Didn't you once say that the ducal house must not easily give its true heart to others?" Rather than let her see your current defeated appearance, it would be better to simply shut the door in her face. The Duke even thought his daughter was caring about him, and even specifically had Medea open a box, inside which was the ring of the family heir. Medea's second step was to spread rumors, making the public mistakenly believe that the person referred to in the divine revelation was Medea. Outside the grand temple, the noise of the crowd instantly surged sky high. Many nobles had paid money, yet still had never managed to obtain the contents of the revelation, and so were furious. A bald man stood up to explain, saying that everyone should stop shouting for refunds. If you demand a refund, the gods will not bless you. This rash remark quickly drew rotten eggs. The scene immediately descended into chaos. Immediately afterward, rumors that Medea would kill her father also began to spread. After Betty helped Medea tidy up the room, she discovered that quite a few servants were actually packing their luggage. Betty asked them what they were doing. The servants said that they wanted to escape the increasingly declining ducal house, and that recently it was being said outside that the young lady would kill the Duke, and that this act would even bring the empire to destruction. The simple-minded Betty said that those were all just baseless rumors, but the servants had already made up their minds not to remain in the Duke's estate. Betty was furious. The young lady had been running around and working herself to death for the ducal house. Yet the servants in the estate were actually this disloyal. But some people refuted that if this kind of rumor reached the ears of the royal family, would not the Duke's daughter then become a rebel? At that moment, Medea made her entrance. The situation before her was exactly what she wanted to see. Immediately afterward, she convened an assembly, preparing to properly knock some sense into these servants in the posture of the head of the family. Medea stood upon the high platform. She said, "You should all know why I have called you here. For those who want to leave, I can give triple severance pay." A little maid immediately felt tempted after hearing this. She at once raised her hand and indicated that she wanted to leave. But in the next second, bang! Medea shot her dead on the spot. This method of killing the chicken to scare the monkeys indeed made all the servants start to fear her. Medea said, "Who else wants to leave? I can even write recommendation letters so that you can serve in other noble households." Originally, the surroundings were dead silent, but one child wanted to live too badly. Leaving meant death. Staying also meant death, so she decided to gamble. Medea admired this child's courage very much, so when others also followed and raised their hands, Medea did not continue a massacre, but instead seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Medea asked Betty for the list of those servants who were preparing to resign, planning to arrange new places for them. And when she heard that the lingering Count Galt would come to the Duke's estate again 3 days later, Medea understood that the timing was now just right.